What's up, sailors, and welcome to the second video for the Reekwater preview event. Again, special thanks to Amazon Game Studios for giving us all the opportunity to get an early look. Today we're going to be diving into the spear weapon of New World. This is a newcomer to the New World weapon lineup. It stacks its damage based off of dexterity and strength, and so far this weapon seems so flexible that it complements both build types to where you could be viable either way. The spear gets access to quick attacks alongside range capabilities for keeping enemies at bay, a couple different methods of crowd control, and even multiple different debuffs you can apply such as rend, bleeds, and even slows. Let's start with the skills and morphs it has access to, beginning with the zoner tree. First, we have Deadly Consistency as the first passive. This one gives you 10% damage on consecutive heavy attacks against a single target. Next, we have Cyclone as the first skill. This is a spinning attack that knocks back surrounding enemies. It has two morphs by the name of Invigorating Combo and Strong Momentum. Invigorating Combo morphs the skill to restore 25 stamina per hit. And for Strong Momentum, this gives the ability Grit, which basically gives super armor to your character. The next passive on the list is known as Potent Thrust. This gives you 30% extra knockback on heavy attacks. Then we've got Invigorating Kills right below it, and this one restores 50 stamina per hit, which might be very useful in PvE situations. Next we have what is known as Javelin, aka Spear Toss. Has 3 different morph passives, starting with Forceful Impact, one of my personal favorites. This gives the Javelin the ability to knock enemies down. Follow that up with Refreshing Precision, gives your headshots with the skill a 50% cooldown reduction bonus. And lastly we've got Deadly Distance, gives you an extra 25% damage based on meters traveled, with a maximum of 100%. Can highly recommend for picking off running targets. At the bottom of the list we have our champion passive known as Reserve Strength. This requires 10 points to be spent on the left skill tree known as Zoner before you can unlock it, and this gives you 25% extra damage while your stamina is full. Next regular passive we have is known as Deadly Reach, 15% extra damage on heavy attacks against targets that are at least 3+ meters away. Then we've got Merciless Strength, gives us 25% extra damage against knockdown targets, which will come in handy on this next one. The last skill is known as Sweep. This sweeps the target's legs and knocks them down. 2 morph abilities starting with Tenacious Sweep, gives your character grit during the attack, followed by Coup de Grace, allows you to execute a basic attack during the sweep to follow up with the powerful downward stab. So far, I've been enjoying this zoner tree quite a bit, and usually have at least one of those skills mixed in with the Impaler tree now that I've had a little bit more practice with this. Moving over to the Impaler, this tree's specialty is closing the gap and executing status effects on your target. First passive is known as Defensive Adjustment, gives you 30% fortify for 3 seconds after hitting targets with active grit. Completely forgot to test this passive out, but I would imagine it gives you damage reduction or some temporary grit of your own. Next we have the first skill, which is Perforate? If you don't mind, I'm just going to call this one Heartseeker Strike because I'm terrible with pronunciation. This gives you 3 piercing stabs that each apply the rend debuff by 5% for 6 seconds. Follow that up with 2 morphs. The first one is Impactful Strikes, 50% extra knockback against blocking targets. Then we've got Rupturing Strikes, which increases the rend debuff effect from 5% per strike to 8%. Next passive we've got is Unerring Precision, gives you 20% extra damage against targets with active grit. Next skill is known as Skewer. Rush forward and skewer your target, then kick them back. Applies the bleed debuff, which is 15% of your weapon damage every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. 3 morph abilities alongside that, starting with Deadly Ambush. Gives you 20% extra damage against targets that have full health. Then we've got Empowering Execution, giving a 20% empower buff for 10 seconds after each kill. And lastly we've got Deep Wound, which takes the 15% scaling of that bleed and increases it to 25%. Now the champion passive for the Impaler tree is known as Exploited Weakness. Requires 10 points in the tree to unlock, same as the others, and it gives you 15% extra damage per debuff on the target. Follow that up with just a few remaining passives, starting with Finishing Blows. This gives you 15% extra damage against targets with less than 30% health. Then you got Refreshing Bloodlust. All the spear cooldowns are reduced by 30% per kill against targets with bleed. The last one is Refreshing Jabs. All cooldowns are reduced by 10% for each basic attack you can land. And the very last skill is Vault Kick. Plant your spear down, vault forward and kick the target. Does a lot of stamina damage, aka block break, and applies 50% of the exhaust debuff for 6 seconds. 2 different morphs on this one, starting with Deadly Opportunity. Gives you 20% empower for 3 seconds after breaking a target's block. Next one is Exhausting Impact. which does 30 stamina damage against targets that are blocking. So now we went over all the skills and their passives. Let me give my final thoughts on this weapon alongside what kind of builds you might see or make in this. First off, this weapon is fantastic. Still need to do more testing, but in just about every aspect, this one seems to be the jack of all trades. Beforehand in my first look, I talked about how I initially stopped using the skewer skill because it locks you in place. The truth is, if you play this weapon more on the side of debuffs, you can vastly improve your damage output compared to other melee weapons. The exhausting impact alongside the vault kick gives the spear the capability to overcome a missing obstacle that people might face against shield users. Both corrupted shieldmen and the dryads especially felt like they had incredibly strong blocks. Sometimes people just forget to bring the block breaker skill on their warhammer, or they use the more useful ones like Path of Destiny, Shockwave, and Mighty Gavel, but this will allow people to adapt more quickly. This and also the dodge roll mechanic they gave us to break CC chains. Believe it or not, I actually like it a lot. Can't tell you how many times I've been caught up in corners by both mobs and players and had no way of getting out of it other than blocking and slashing while I said a prayer. But for build suggestions, honestly I haven't had a whole lot of time with this weapon yet, and I strongly encourage you to theorycraft and test it out to your heart's desire. But this is what I would use from what we've seen so far. For either a strength or constitution build, which I would usually go for, I'd take sword and shield, spear, and a great hammer. For the spear skills to complement both of my weapons' crowd control and defensive abilities, I'd play spear more on the debuff side. Skills I'd take, Heartseeker Strike, Skewer, and either Impaler for open world PvP and war, or Vault Kick for PvE. Usually on my warhammer I don't take block break, so this would be a nice substitute weapon for getting around defenses. For dexterity builds, I'd probably run spear, bow, and hatchet. Gear wise I'd take full heavy armor for strength build, and full medium armor for dex. Skill wise for player vs player, I'd take sweep, cyclone, and vault kick. With dexterity, I would mainly use the bow for range, so I wouldn't really need javelin. I'd focus on shooting the bow from mid to long range, only using the spear if someone gets really close. First I'd pop off a spread shot with the bow, but if that failed, I'd switch to the spear and immediately try to sweep them for the knockdown, or use the vault kick if they're trying to block. If things got really hairy, I'd pull out the hatchet and cast berserk so I can hopefully survive long enough to get some hits in, or get out of there. You could also bait someone into getting close so you could sweep them, and then switch to the bow and pop off a spread shot right in their face. All those arrows at once and they're probably going down right there. And with that folks, thank you so much for checking out this Spear Beginner Guide. Hope you enjoy using this weapon and have a wonderful night or day. Farewell.